So it is May 27th, 2020. We're doing another episode of For Our People. Yes, we should have been, it should have been on May 25th. It should have been on Monday for Memorial Day. And no, I was actually not taking a Memorial Day vacation. I actually was hosting or moderating a panel for the Africa Sports Venture Group for Africa Day, May 25th, or African Liberation Day. Every year in May is Africa Day or African Liberation Day, and I was helping the Africa Sports Venture Group celebrate it with a conference on sports, the sports industry in Africa post COVID-19. So, for those that don't know, on top of being a law professor and interested in tax and economics and race, I'm also a sportsaholic, right? And so, helping to grow the sports industry in Africa is something that I'm pretty passionate about, and very thankful to the Africa Sports Venture Group, Yolanda Thompson, Leslie Karoma. The keynote speaker for the conference was George Weah, the president of Liberia, who was also the soccer player or footballer of the year back in like 1994. So it was a wonderful event. Shout out to the Minister of Sports and Youth in Nigeria, Sunday Akindare, his deputy, Dr. Simon Ibojai. We also had a representative, the Minister of Youth and Sports for the South Sudan, the newest nation in Africa, which could have been named Kush, right? Dr. Albino Bol Joe was in attendance, and also, and also the Minister of Sports and Youth and Sports for Liberia, Minister Zogar Wilson, D. Zogar Wilson. So I had a great time with that conference. I'm enjoying all this Zoom new technology, and it's really telling me that I got to update what we're doing here on For Our People. And it seems like it'll be pretty easy to kind of get some of these authors that we're talking to also participate. That'd be great. So that's what we were doing on May 25th. Monday at 11 o'clock, and the reason why we're now shooting this video here on Wednesday. Hope you can bear with us. Again, we can't meet at the bookstore, 210 South 52nd Street, but we're opening up. So maybe next week, maybe we will be back there. That'd be a good thing for June. But the show goes on For Our People, Africa Day May 25th, at Hakim's Bookstore. 210 South 52nd Street. You can check us out at HakimsBookstore.com, Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook Live, and also my personal page, Afrolantican Jurisprudence at YouTube. Right, that's my YouTube channel, and I'm very close to finishing that book, Afro-Latin Jurisprudence: 6,000 Years of Extraordinary Commitment to Equal Protection in Pre-Colonial Africa. Okay, now having said that, every week we're going to try to help bookstores not just survive, but to thrive. And we're starting here with Hakim's, the second oldest black bookstore in the country, help it survive, not just survive, but to thrive. So please go to www.gofundme.com/HakimsBookstore, and please donate what you can and help this black institution, this educational institution, thrive and provide service to our community for another 60 years into the future. I think that's really appropriate. A lot of us right now with heavy hearts about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, right? All of these deaths, the idea that black lives don't seem to matter in larger society. That means we have to bring surrealism to our communities. Shout out to D. Scott Miller. Shout out to Malcolm Hoover for the panel that I was on a couple weeks ago. And surrealism is accepting that we are in a system of white supremacy and still carving out our own world within it, right? Or outside of it, however you want to present it. So this is also what we're engaging right now, is an attempt at surrealism and creating and establishing and supporting black bookstores all across the country is a way that we can create a world for our kids within the system of white supremacy to give them some relief. Who am I? Who am I? Andre Smith, Smitty Bonta, Andre Smith, former law professor for 15 years, American Association of Law School Institutions. I'm the author of Black Tax, Tax Law and Racial and Economic Justice back in 2015. I've also published Taxes, Death, and Trouble back in 2018, Outlaw Amateurism, and again, the next book, or my third full-length book, is Afro-Lantican Jurisprudence, and I hope to have that out this June, as a matter of fact. And so, as a writer, as a scholar, as a law professor, I believe that it is my job to bring scholarship and knowledge that I've encountered while in the ivory tower and outside. It's my job to bring the books, the scholarship, the authors to you, to your homes, so that you don't have to go outside, and we're going to bring it right to you. So we were doing this before the pandemic, so that you don't have to go to a predominantly white institution or a college or university or even HBCU. We can bring that knowledge online in a very, very erudite fashion. So I'm glad for everybody that's joining us, everybody that's checking us out, and for everybody that also is in support of Hakim's Bookstore. We look forward to being there pretty shortly. Now, before I get into the books, I do want to say again, this situation, or the recent death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, the death of Breonna Taylor, the death of Ahmaud Arbery. Again, I want to push strategy, right? Yes, there is a time to be angry and emotional, but there also it has to lead to strategy. It has to lead to goals, proposals. It has to lead to action, right? And what that action is needs to be effective, right? And so before this recent spate, and first of all, I don't even know that it's a recent spate. Again, as sad as I am about this, as angry as I am about this, I still don't like the feeling of being manipulated, in the sense that these videos are coming out in a stream, basically at the 6-month mark out from the presidential election. So I hope I am wrong about this being a get out the vote effort, because I do believe these deaths, these killings of our people are occurring even when they're not being filmed, or even if they are being filmed and not necessarily broadcast on social media, right? Media campaigns typically cost money. And so I fear that these videos are being used by political operatives as a get out the vote tool. Now, yes, we need to get out the vote. Yes, we need to push the fact that Black Lives Matter. The upsetting part about it would be if after November the videos go back in the closet and politics goes back as usual, as would happen with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? It was supported, it was well funded and supported up until the 2016 election, and then after the election, the funding dried up. And funding and the accolades, the publicity for the Black Lives Matter movement waned after the political season, and I hope that doesn't happen again. So, when we talk about what we should do, when we talk about it, what do I tell my kids? Again, I think we should be politically engaged, very much so. However, I think that is just one form of capital, political capital. On the other hand, political capital responds to financial capital. We know this. And we get financial capital by building up our human and social capital, by building up ourselves in our community. So a friend of mine was asking, what should she be telling her son in these days and times? And my argument, or my suggestion, was this. I believe that with our sons, with our daughters, right, in this time, because again, Breonna Taylor, Kiara Gaines, and all that, Sandra Bland, they are not exempt from this violence. And so I say that we start by teaching our kids that the war against white supremacy begins in the mind, right? Street protests are fantastic, but we have to get our mind straight. And that racism, we have to understand it, that racism is at its base about white people being the haves and black people being the have-nots. Right, there is the economic component is central to this. Now, there's other components. There's other ways in which there is control, there is and power. However, the bottom line is they brought us here and up to America to work for cheap, right? And so that they would have and that we would have not. So, in that vein, the police are hired. Basically, they are maintained. Their job is to maintain this order, right? Right? Subordination, hierarchy, order, right? And so that's what we need our children to understand. That I don't talk necessarily about hatred. I don't talk about racial hatred. I talk about racial economics. That their personal success, right, is revolutionary. And don't let anybody tell you different, right? That you're being a token or whatever. We were brought here to work for cheap. So the more expensive you make yourself, the more valuable you make yourself, you are actually striking a blow against white supremacy. Believe that. So by educating yourself, by becoming self-sufficient, building your community, that's what white supremacy fears. That's what it hates, right? Because it's anathema to the whole system. The idea that you would have and they have not, right? When they want it to be the other way around. So we as elders, we need to teach the kids how to fight. They're natural born warriors, but we need to teach them how to fight effectively and efficiently, which means preserving their lives. Not sending my son out there with AK-47s or whatever, losing battle or whatnot. My son is going to be a warrior with his mind and figure out how to have success in the most effective and efficient manner, which includes preserving his and all other black lives. Black lives have to matter to us first. Right? So that's why at the end of every program, you hear me say, better educate ourselves and our children, start and patronize black businesses and institutions, and let's stop unduly criticizing each other and promoting the myth of black inferiority. Right? Those are tactics. That's strategy. Those are how we're going to build up our human, social, political, and financial capital. That's the revolution that will never be televised. That's the revolution that the police can't stop. The police can't stop you from educating yourself, or educating your children, right? They can stop you from being employed, but you can start your own business, right? And then to refrain from criticizing each other and building up social capital. They don't have control over that. We have more control over that than they do. So those are ways we can be independent, self-determinative, and fight this war against white supremacy, right, in a way that is effective and efficient and preserves life, right, preserves life. All right, so we're going to put that down. We're going to get straight into the books. I know it's a little bit of a sad day, but the knowledge never stops. The knowledge never stops. Matter of fact, the knowledge today will be in honor of all those that have fallen, in honor of George Floyd. We presented in weeks past a black feminist approach for everyone. Afro-Pessimism by Frank Wilderson. Oh my goodness. If that book isn't relevant right now to the people that are frustrated, the people that are tired of being tired, the academic that is expressing your feelings of, I'm not going to say hopelessness, but pessimism or and frustration at the position we are now and the lack of options we seem to have, at least publicly. Afro-Pessimism by Frank Wilderson, a Stanford philosopher, is for you. On the other hand, for those that want to continue the fight, Collective Courage by Jessica Nunhard Gordon. There was also The History of Africa, Molefe Kete Asante, the father of Afrocentricity, his latest book, African Dominions by Michael Gomez. We reviewed that some weeks ago. Race After Technology, The New Jim Code by Ruha Benjamin. Convictions of Faith by R.S. Besi, a book about Kimpa Vida, right? A stalwart woman, fighter, protester, revolutionary agent in the Congo against the Portuguese, right? So, studying revolutionary movements, studying our black heroes that fought white supremacy in lots of different contexts are ways that we can honor Breonna Taylor, ways that we can honor George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. Woo! Reparations is a hot topic. William Darity, the preeminent black economist in the country, of course, that's one of his major themes, put out a book along with A. Kirsten Mullen, University of North Carolina Press. Last week, we talked about Caring for Equality, a history of African American health and healthcare, Bearing Witness while Black, African Americans, Smartphones and the New Protest, journalism, Jordan Peele's Get Out. There's an academic book that's discussing his book about political horror. And the Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, Navigate an Unequal System, Learn Tools of Emotional Wellness, and Get the Help You Deserve by Rita Walker. And the foreword is written by Brother Naeem Akbar. So for those that are into health and wellness, mental health, physical health, and whatnot, want to avoid or combat racialized healthcare, fantastic book that we did last week. So that brings us to today, this week. Have some several very, very, very interesting books that I personally want to get my hands on. There's at least two that I absolutely have to invest in. Some of them come again. We always want to shout out the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education for their weekly book list. Definitely appreciate you all. And so for most of these books, you can probably go find them on that website, www.jbhe.com, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. Some of these other books are just books that I found other places. Mark Anthony Neal at Duke University has a blog called The New Black Man in Exile, and another one called Left of Black. Got some books, new books out from him. He does a great podcast and discussion with scholars and authors and what have you. Also, Karen Hunter's show. She does a fantastic job of also. I think she had the great Dr. Greg Carr on her show again, which is fabulous. He is definitely a teacher to me. Right, I will sit at his feet and listen for long periods of time. Anoka Rashidi, etc. But let's move on to the books that we have here today that we're going to present to you. Hopefully, get your appetite wet and interested to purchase or acquire these books however you might. Again, you can go to the website here at HakimsBookstore.com. You can hit up the store, 215-474-9495. Hakim's Bookstore on Instagram. Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook. You can reach out to us. We will get these books for you. So the first one that's out this week, or at least out that we're going to feature this week, Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot. Say that again. Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot, right? And so then we see this intersectionality between black women and black men, but also there's an intersectionality when it comes to black feminism. And so not just black women, but black women from the less wealthy classes seem to have been left behind. And Mikki Kendall, this is her debut book, is addressing this hood feminism. It's called A Potent and Electrifying Critique of Today's Feminist Movement, Announcing a Fresh New Voice in Black Feminism. And this is basically from the book itself. Today's feminist movement has a glaring blind spot, and paradoxically, it is women. Mainstream feminists rarely talk about meeting basic needs as a feminist issue, argues Mikki Kendall, but food insecurity, access to quality education, safe neighborhoods, a living wage, and medical care are all feminist issues. All too often, however, the focus is not on the basics of survival for the many, but on increasing privilege for the few. That feminists refuse to prioritize these issues has only exacerbated the age-old problem of both internecine discord and women who rebuff at carrying the title. Moreover, prominent white feminists broadly suffer from their own myopia with regard to how things like race, class, sexual orientation, and ability intersect with gender. Now, just talk about intersectionality. How can we stand in solidarity as a movement, Kendall asks, when there is the distinct likelihood that some women are oppressing others? In her searing collection of essays, Mikki Kendall takes aim at the legitimacy of the modern feminist movement, arguing that it has chronically failed to address the needs of all but a few women, drawing on her own experiences with hunger, violence, and hypersexualization, along with incisive commentary on politics, pop culture, the stigma of mental health, and more. Hood Feminism delivers an irrefutable indictment of a movement in flux. An unforgettable debut, Kendall has written a ferocious, clarion call to all would-be feminists to live out the true mandate of the movement in thought and in deed. Right? 10 years ago, we had a trend where it was black feminism speaking about how the intersectionality of race and gender was leaving black women at the hands of black men as their oppressors, and now we see the other side of the coin emerging, how black women seeking feminist ideals are basically finding oppression or lack of progressive ideals within the feminist movement, and again the finding themselves alone or abandoned or even subordinated at the crossroads, at the intersection of race and gender. Very interesting book, Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. I want to remind us that, again, a black feminist approach by everyone was Minna Salami, and her perspective is coming as a Nigerian woman. So we have Mikki Kendall coming from the inner city. We got Minna Salami coming from Nigeria, giving perspectives on feminism that are outside mainstream academic circles. Wonderful stuff. Now here's a book that I'm going to have to invest in myself, especially as an Afrocentric thinker, right? When we're talking about Afrocentricity, we're not just talking about the United States and Africa, just black people in the United States and black people in Africa. We're talking about black people worldwide, Pan-African, with Africa as the center. However, whether it's the black folks, the Dalits in India, Afro-Mexicans, Bahia and Brazil, or the United States, we're talking about black folks as a mass attacking combating global white supremacy, right? To the extent each of us is in a severe racial wealth gap within our own particular countries, it is going to be the coalescing internationally that is going to provide some hope, some counter to Afro-pessimism, right? So, this is a great book that's come out on that theme, or I'm sorry, consistent with, not on it, but at least consistent with that theme, Finding Afro-Mexico, Race and Nation After the Revolution by Theodore Cohen. Right? This is interrogating the racial, cultural, and political foundations of Mexican nationality in the African diaspora. Theodore W. Cohen reveals how Mexicans, African Americans, and Cubans have understood black identity in Mexico since the 1910 revolution. This study provides crucial context for the position of Afro-Mexicans in today's society. Right? And I know a lot of people, some of you may know that the president of Mexico who abolished slavery was an Afro-Mexican named Vicente Guerrero, right? So the history of blacks in Mexico is deep. The Garifuna that reside in what's the country right next to Mexico? Belize, right? So the Africans, of course, were dropped off or put on or delivered to plantations all over South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and the United States, and we need to continue to recognize that. So this study provides crucial context for the position of Afro-Mexicans in today's society. Theodore Cohen is an associate professor at Lindenwood University in Missouri, and he writes this. In 2015, the Mexican state counted how many of its citizens identified as Afro-Mexican for the first time since independence. Finding Afro-Mexico reveals the transnational interdisciplinary histories that led to this celebrated reformulation of Mexican national identity. It traces the Mexican, African American, and Cuban writers, poets, anthropologists, artists, composers, historians, and archaeologists who integrated Mexican history, culture, and society into the African diaspora after the Revolution of 1910. Cohen persuasively shows how these intellectuals rejected the 19th century racial paradigms that heralded black disappearance when they made blackness visible first in Mexican culture and then in post-revolutionary society. Drawing from more than 20 different archives across the Americas, the cultural and intellectual history of Black visibility, invisibility, and community formation questions the racial, cultural, and political dimensions of Mexican history and Afro-diasporic thought. Right? We talk about Blackness visible. Again, that invokes Brother Charles Mills, the philosopher at Northwestern. Right? Blackness visible, the racial contract, and all that. So those are two books that I found outside of the Journal of Blacks of Higher Education. Definitely interested in both of them, and finding Afro-Mexico is definitely a book that I'm going to have to put a lot of time into. Now, here are the books that we have that have been presented by the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education in their weekly book list. Some very interesting stuff here. Being Property Once Myself. Being Property Once Myself. Blackness and the End of Man by Joshua Bennett. Joshua Bennett is a Dartmouth young brother who's teaching now at Dartmouth. His book was published by Harvard University Press, and it joins again with a list of books that have come out in the last year dealing with race and, for lack of a better word, race and animals, or showing or drawing, comparing and contrasting, I guess you could say, the racial subjugation of Black folks with the hierarchy that has animals at the bottom, right? And so this book here kind of is using literature to talk about, and literature in Black spaces, to talk about animals and their servitude to humans in relation to also Black servitude to white supremacy. Interesting stuff. Here's from the description of the book. A prize-winning poet, that's Josh Bennett, a prize-winning poet argues that Blackness acts as the caesura between human and non-human, man and animal. Throughout U.S. history, Black people have been configured as socio-legal non-persons, a subgenre of the human. Being Property Once Myself delves into the literary imagination and ethical concerns that have emerged from this experience. Each chapter tracks a specific animal figure: the rat, the cock, the mule, the dog, and the shark, in the works of Black authors such as Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, Jesmyn Ward, and Robert Hayden. The plantation, the wilderness, the kitchenette overrun with pests, the simultaneous valuation and sale of animals and enslaved people. All are sites made unforgettable by literature in which we find Black and animal life in fraught proximity. Joshua Bennett argues that animal figures are deployed in these texts to assert a theory of Black sociality and to combat dominant claims about the limits of personhood. Interesting stuff right there. I need to put my hands on that, right? I had not read the book, but what it invoked to me, again, is we talked about Afro-pessimism. We know that there are people that are giving up hope, that think that racial subordination will remain in its current content for the rest of all time. And that's something I just vehemently disagree with. I think history tells us that even if we don't see, as Martin says, even if it's not in my lifetime, even if I don't make it to the mountaintop, we know that the last will be first and the first will be last at some point in the future. The question for us is, how can we make that happen sooner than later, maybe in our grandchildren's time, And I think if I were to invoke this relationship or proximity between African Americanness or Blackness and the animal world, it is that think how pessimistic an animal could be at this point, that knows all about, that has seen several species go extinct. They know that humans go hard in the paint, and yet, as little power as they may have over human civilization, they can still take heart in knowing that people will kill themselves off and relinquish the earth back to the animals at some point in the future. That no matter how high humans get and place animals below us, there's going to be a point in the future where man, human, whatever you want to call us, are going to basically kill ourselves, right? And then leave this world to the animals that are left behind. And so for the animals, what's the key? Survival, right? Even if I can't fight y'all to the death, even if animals can't take over the human world. They can survive until the time when the human world crumbles. Now, take that as far as white supremacy. One of the things that Afro-pessimism and other forms of capitulation to white supremacy take is the infallibility of whiteness. That for somehow white people have this godlike power to maintain for all time, when we know that they did not get onto the world scene until 300-400 years ago. And then secondly, that white supremacy was at its pinnacle, I say, around 1901. And then after you reach the top, you start killing each other. World War I, World War II, the Cold War, etc. Neoconservatives have recognized the slow dismantling and demise of white supremacy since the Civil Rights Movement, and have actively tried to support and reinvigorate it. Right? They wouldn't need to do that if they thought that they were totally infallible and that white supremacy was natural and unrelenting for all time. So these are the reasons why I am optimistic. Right? To me, Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, Afrocentricity is optimism. We are the antidote to Afro-pessimism in my mind. Speaking of Pan-Africanism, let's talk about the second book, Cultural Entanglements, Langston, Hughes, and the Rise of African and Caribbean Literature by Shane Graham. We'll just take a little blurb from this. In addition to being a poet, fiction writer, playwright, and essayist, Langston Hughes was also a globe-trotting cosmopolitan, travel writer, translator, avid international network, and perhaps above all, Pan-Africanist. And he was a Q. Shout out to Q Sci-Fi. In Cultural Entanglements, Shane Graham examines Hughes' associations with a number of black writers from the Caribbean and Africa, exploring the implications of recognizing these multiple facets of the African American literary icon and of taking a truly transnational approach to his life, work, and influence. Again, Langston Hughes was not down with ADOS. The next book we have is Lift Every Voice and Sing, Black Musicians and Religious Culture in the Jazz Century by Vaughn A. Booker. I think Vaughn Booker is also at Dartmouth, right? I think there's a Princeton education to Dartmouth connection going along with Joshua Bennett and Vaughn Booker. I could be wrong. Anyway, Booker explores the role of jazz celebrities like Ella Fitzgerald, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, and Mary Lou Williams as representatives of African American religion in the 20th century. Let me say that again. Booker explores the role of jazz celebrities like Ella Fitzgerald, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, and Mary Lou Williams as representatives of African American religion in the 20th century. And see, I'm someone that grew up thinking that jazz and religion were totally anathema because jazz originally meant sex. But let me see what this brother is talking about. Beginning in the 1920s, the jazz age propelled black swing artists into national celebrity. Many took on the role of race representatives and were able to leverage their popularity towards achieving social progress for other African Americans. True. In Lift Every Voice and Swing, I didn't catch that. Let me say that again. In Lift Every Voice and Swing, Vaughn A. Booker argues that with the emergence of these popular jazz figures who came from a culture shaped by black Protestantism, religious authority for African Americans found a place and spokespeople outside of a traditional Afro-Protestant institutions and religious life. Popular black jazz professionals such as Fitzgerald, Calloway, Ellington, and Williams inherited religious authority, though they were not official religious leaders. Some of these artists put toward a religious culture in the mid-20th century by releasing religious recordings and putting on religious concerts, and their work came to be seen as integral to the black religious ethos. Booker documents this transformative era in religious expression in which jazz musicians embodied religious beliefs and practices that echoed and diverged from the predominant African American religious culture. Interesting. I have no doubt that there were those connections. However, it does seem, I don't know, I guess I would have to read the book to see how prevalent it was within the jazz scene. I have no doubt that there were certain folks that did, in fact, write on religious themes, but it is interesting to me, jazz and swing as religious leaders. Interesting point. Now, we're going to close this out with two memoirs. One by brothers that are in their 80s and 90s at this point that have lived absolutely full and fantastic lives. The saying goes, when an old person dies, a library burns to the ground, right? Because they take all that knowledge with them. One way we can stop that, or at least counter that, is for us to encourage our elders to write their memoirs, to give us their journals and their diaries so that we can understand the lives they led outside of mainstream news reporting, right? So the first one, Officer Clemmons. Let me let that sit for a while. Officer Clemmons. Who's Officer Clemmons? That's right, from the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood, right? The black cop. A memoir by Francois Clemens. The intimate debut memoir by the man known to the world as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood's Officer Clemens, who made history as the first African-American actor to have a recurring role on a children's television program. When he created the role of Officer Clemens on the award-winning television series Mr. Rogers, Francois Clemens made history as the first African-American with such a role. A new wide world opened for Clemens, but one that also required him to make painful personal choices and sacrifices. Officer Clemens details his incredible life story, beginning with his early years in Alabama and Ohio, marked by family trauma loss, to his studies as a music major. Apparently, I did not know this, he is a well-regarded and accomplished opera singer, right? Where Clemens began to investigate and embrace his homosexuality, to a chance encounter with Fred Rogers that changed the whole course of both men's lives, leading to a deep spiritual friendship and mentorship spanning nearly 40 years. And they mentioned in the book that Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, prohibited or prevented him from expressing his homosexuality in the character. From New York to Russia, Berlin to California, Grammy Award-winning Clemens has performed for audiences around the world and remains a beloved figure. I did not know he had a professional artistic career outside of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And then the last book, this memoir by Twitty J. Stiles, a professor at Union College in Prince Edward County, Virginia, right? So not necessarily, it's interesting because we think about the Deep South, but slavery and race in Virginia, in Kentucky, in Tennessee should be explored a lot more, because there we're not dealing necessarily with cotton plantations. We're dealing with perhaps tobacco, also enslaved persons that had professional occupations more often than agricultural. So very interesting that this brother has written a memoir. Son of Prince Edward County is a magnificent inspiration to those of any age and of any race. This book is an example of overcoming boundaries and working hard for what you want and believe in. The story of Twitty J. Stiles is his first-hand experience with the strike that took place in Prince Edward County in Farmville, Virginia. He shares the hardships that he experienced in grade school, the military, and college. Although this book is a collection of Stiles' struggles, it also shows the glory of the people and students that he has affected over the years. Again, for all our seniors, our teachers, our professors, yes, please write those memoirs. Please give us those diaries. Please give us that vision and that perspective of the past from your perspective, so we don't have to rely on academics, relying on the media, right? That we can create this world where knowledge is shared between ourselves. I would use the term griots. We know the term griot, but apparently that's a term that was implanted upon the oral historians of Africa, and that the more correct word for those folks are Ingeli, right? Griots or Ingeli, those that carry the history of their people in the brain and express it to the youth. So that wraps up our session today, our books for this week. We talked about Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall, Finding Afro-Mexico, Race and Nation After the Revolution by Theodore W. Cohen, Being Property Once Myself, Blackness and the End of Man by Joshua Bennett, Cultural Entanglements, Langston, Hughes, and the Rise of African American Caribbean Literature by Shane Graham, Lift Every Voice and Swing, Black Musicians and Religious Culture in the Jazz Century by Vaughn Booker, Officer Clemens, a memoir by Francois Clemens, and also Son of Prince Edward County by Twitty J. Stiles. So we're going to end that here. We're going to be back on Monday right? This coming Monday, I guess that would be June 1st. So we're going to kick off June with For Our People. We're going to hopefully be back at Hakim's Bookstore. We don't know. Philadelphia can open up like that. Talk to Miss Yvonne Blake, Princess Y, Princess Glenda, and all that, and see if we can get back into the building and keep Hakim's Bookstore and all black bookstores. We're going to create an event that's going to try to help support all black bookstores in the country financially. And we'll talk about that a little later in the future. But for right now, remember, we're going to better educate ourselves and our children. We're going to start and patronize black businesses and institutions. We're going to stop unduly criticizing each other and promoting the myth of black inferiority. That's the accumulation of human, social, political, and financial capital. That is the revolution that will never be televised. See you next week. Hotep.